John Dixon began his video diary on a seemingly ordinary day, August 14, 2015, documenting an event that would forever alter his life, and possibly all of humanity. It started with an urgent call from his flatmate, Michael, who shouted for John to hurry. As they stepped outside, a fleet of alien spacecraft hovered ominously over the Edinburgh sky. They watched in awe and terror as explosions rocked the sky, and the ships released creatures they soon nicknamed toons. John's initial fear turned into amusement when the creatures responded to their gestures, even waving back, and he recorded every moment. 2 weeks later, the toons had become an unexpected, bizarre part of life on Earth. John's flat was now home to 2 of them, whom he and Michael had whimsically named David and Stephen. Though John found their company intriguing, Michael wasn't as amused, especially when the creatures began rummaging through their belongings. Life with the toons was chaotic, but John couldn't help but feel fascinated, even filming what he called a wee diary for posterity. As the days turned into months, anti-toon riots erupted globally, but John and Michael carried on with their unusual domestic arrangement. During the toons' first Christmas, they even helped decorate the tree, albeit in their unique, chaotic way. By the first anniversary of their arrival, the toons had become like family, despite the disorder they brought. John planned a surprise party for them, enlisting Michael's reluctant help. The party was an absurd, surreal celebration, with the toons attempting to drink and dance with a room full of humans. Michael's discomfort grew as he watched the toons drink heavily, his concern masked by a veil of reluctant humor. But the light-heartedness turned dark the following morning. At dawn, Michael noticed the front door ajar and the toons missing. As they ventured outside in search, they saw streets engulfed in chaos. Glass shattered, car alarms blared, and an eerie silence settled over the city, broken only by distant explosions. Reports flooded in about large, aggressive creatures wreaking havoc across the city, each bearing a strange resemblance to the toons. They encountered a man named Charles, a zoology student who had studied the toons since their arrival. Charles revealed a grim theory. The toons were undergoing a transformation, preparing to reproduce, and it seemed they needed human hosts. Just then, one of the toons Charles had experimented on began to mutate, lunging at them with a ferocious roar. Barely escaping the transformed toons' attack, they found themselves running through the city, John's camera still capturing their panicked breaths and muffled screams. Charles explained that the toons, or at least some of them, likely the females, were changing into these monstrous forms. They weren't just reproducing. They were transforming humans into their next generation. John and Michael's hope of survival dwindled as they dodged increasingly aggressive creatures. Desperate, Michael insisted they search for their missing toons on Calton Hill, clinging to a fragile hope that perhaps David and Stephen could still be saved. The journey was perilous, the streets littered with debris and terrorized citizens. Against John's protests, Michael managed to find David, who seemed to recognize them. But as they approached, Stephen, who had once been their friend and flatmate, lunged at them in a grotesque, altered form, driven by an instinct they could no longer understand. John screamed, fighting for his life as Stephen's monstrous face loomed closer, his friend now a creature consumed by an alien instinct. In the final moments, the camera captured John and Michael's terrified expressions, running into the unknown, with the eerie cries of the transformed toons echoing in the distance. John and Michael tore through the streets, their breaths ragged, hearts pounding in sync with the distant, relentless howls of the transformed toons. The world had turned into a nightmare, and their beloved city lay shattered and smoldering under the weight of the otherworldly invasion. Shadows flickered under the glow of burning buildings, twisting and stretching into monstrous shapes as John and Michael ducked into an alleyway, pausing to catch their breath. But there was no escape from the reality that bore down on them. These creatures weren't just invaders. They were consuming and converting everything familiar, warping it into a version of themselves. As they moved forward, they were startled by sudden movement from above. A broken window shattered, scattering glass around them like crystalline rain. Out of the shadows emerged Charles, battered and wide-eyed, clutching a makeshift weapon in one hand. His clothes were torn, and his face was streaked with ash and dried blood, yet he wore a grim determination. Charles's revelations about the toons had been haunting enough, but his appearance now suggested he'd seen horrors that defied explanation. He gave them a shaky nod, gesturing for them to follow him to a safer place he'd found, a forgotten corner beneath Edinburgh's ancient stone foundations. Once inside, Charles pieced together his theory of what was happening, every word adding to the growing dread that curled around them like the shadows in the dim room. These toons, they've been adapting to our biology from the start, gathering what they needed, changing, learning. His voice shook as he continued, the females, their reproductive cycle, it's warping everything. Humans are being altered to incubate them, reshaping into these twisted forms as they prepare to birth the next generation. John felt a cold shiver ripple down his spine. The toons, once endearing and comical in their alien awkwardness, were now agents of something primal and unfathomable. But Michael's face softened, his gaze turning downward, his fists clenched. But David and Stephen, they're still our friends, right? They remembered us. His voice was almost pleading, searching for some spark of hope in this dark new reality. Charles sighed, his eyes tired but resolute. They may remember us now, but they're being driven by an instinct that's impossible to resist. They're preparing for the next cycle of life. They've used us, our kindness, our trust. And now they'll stop at nothing to survive. The words hung heavy in the air, each syllable like the tolling of a distant bell. A deep rumble reverberated through the ground, accompanied by the guttural roars of more creatures prowling the streets. Their time was running out. John grabbed his camera, the faint, comforting weight of it in his hand somehow grounding him. If this was the end, he was determined to capture every terrifying moment. Not for history, perhaps not even for survival, but as a reminder of what humanity had been, just days before their world was changed forever. With a silent nod, the three of them emerged from their hiding place, venturing back into the maze of twisted streets, moving toward Calton Hill with desperate hope, and a growing sense that this would be their final stand. The mist began to creep over the ground, swirling around their ankles like the spirits of the fallen, and in the distance, the silhouettes of creatures loomed, their distorted bodies twitching in the eerie light of dawn. The toons' wails filled the air, haunting and beautiful in their strange alien melody, a song of change and survival that echoed through the ruined city. And in that moment, as John looked around at his friends, at Michael, at Charles, at the burning city beyond, he knew that they were fighting not just for their lives, but for the fragile hope that humanity could still survive, that even in this nightmare, they could reclaim their world from the depths of alien horror. With a final defiant breath, they moved forward, into the unknown.